Good morning, folks. We are privileged to have with us Senator Kesha Ram. She is running for the Congress from the at-large seat from the state of Vermont. It's a pleasure to have her with us. My name is Ravinder Sachdev. I'm a co-founder of the US India Political Action Committee. We would love to understand more about her, campaign and candidature, which she will share with you, and then we hope to share her message with as many via our social media, platforms, as well as we'll share with the senator and her team, and they could also, spread it. And the audiences for this show, this podcast, is definitely the Indian American community, but also the wider audiences, because the message for any candidate is a wide, message. So that said, good morning, Senator. Now, you are running for the open seat in Vermont. Okay, what is your strategy to win this election?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Robinderji, for having me on this podcast. Thank you to USINPAC, who, as an organization, have really been there for a lot of Indian Americans. And some folks around the country may not know that you have a South Asian candidate or an Indian American who has served for a decade in the legislature in Vermont. It's not somewhere people go looking for the Indian community, but here I am. And it's just a privilege to be with you. Vermont has one congressional seat, as you mentioned. Many people don't realize that. And so this seat comes along and is open about once in a generation. The last time it was open was 16 years ago. And that was when now Congressman Peter Welch was running for the seat. And when then our congressman at the time, Bernie Sanders, ran for the US Senate seat. And in fact, I joined them on stage when they kicked off their campaigns. I was a sophomore in college at the time, and they wanted to bring someone who would help draw a crowd. So they invited this rock star senator from Illinois, who had a father from Kenya and a mother from Kansas, to kick off the event. And of course, he did draw a crowd. He was a very popular guy. People were very intrigued by him in 2006. And I spoke first. I talked about student debt and climate change and issues that matter to young people at my university. And after I spoke, they went on down the line. The last speaker was this senator from Illinois. And in the middle of his speech, he's talking about having a funny name no one can pronounce. I thought, wow, me too, especially here in Vermont. And he started talking about the arc of the moral universe bending toward justice. And then he said, and you know what, Bernie, if you don't behave yourself, we're going to run Kesha for the Senate instead of you. Awesome. And it was the first time anyone encouraged me to run for office. And, for those who haven't guessed, or maybe too young to remember, that rock star senator from Illinois, that was now past President Barack Obama. And he was the first person to encourage me to run for office. That was 2006. And in 2008, we both shared a ballot. He became the 44th president of the United States, and I became one of the youngest legislators in the country and the youngest South Asian legislator ever elected in history. So, I personally have a father from India and a mother from Illinois, and, always thought that it might be hard for someone like me to find a place in American politics until he came along and really changed my mind about that. And so I started serving in 2008, and that was, as some may remember, the free fall of the Great Recession. And now I serve in the Vermont Senate in what would be considered a free fall and a health and economic crisis of the pandemic. So I've lived through two major crises as a legislator over my span of 16 years, with a break in between to get my master's degree. And that has really shown me how important it is to have a federal partner who knows especially what a small rural state needs and how to be able to access that to help them. People have put their faith in me in Vermont many times over. I was elected with one of the highest vote counts in Chittenden County, where I serve as a state senator now. And Chittenden County is a third of the vote in the Democratic primary. The Democratic primary in Vermont is going to be the contest, almost certainly. We are a state that, chooses a Republican governor, but a socialist US senator. And so it flips back and forth often. But since Jim Jeffords, our Republican US senator who became an independent because he could no longer live with the Republican Party so many decades ago, we have pretty much exclusively sent Democrats and blue candidates to Washington. And this seat was once held by Bernie Sanders, called the conscience of the Congress. And I think Vermonters are really ready for someone who can build a movement once again to have this seat. I have the support already of many labor and climate leaders, and that is really valuable and important in Vermont. I have the support, for example, of Bill McKibben, who is the founder of 350.org, a global movement to draw attention to the urgent need to bring down the greenhouse gas emissions of the globe and save our planet from overheating. And I also have the support of the Rural Letter Carriers Association. So our postal service is very important to us in Vermont, as it is around the country. And I have the support of the Communication Workers of America, who've been on the other end of the line, helping a lot of folks through this pandemic. I'm the only candidate in the race with major climate and labor endorsements. And that's very helpful in a race like ours, where people are looking for distinction.
That is fantastic to hear. And of course, yeah, definitely, as you were the youngest legislator, right, state legislator in the US at one point of time, right?
At that point in time, there've certainly been younger, especially in Northern New England, where you can run for office with maybe $5,000. You have to add a few more zeros in most other places. But here you can really run for a seat as a college student or a recent college graduate. And at the time in 2008, I was the youngest in the country at 22.
Okay, two questions upon what you were saying. First, a quick question. You took a break for your master's. If I could ask, what was the area of your master's studies?
Yeah, I went to the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and got a master's of public administration. It was really an opportunity to look at all of my policy successes and policy failures and learn more about what happened. We often, I had gone straight from college to 8 years in the House of Representatives making policy at the state level. And I had won some and lost some. I had failed, and failing is a great way to learn, but you have to be able to look back and dissect it and figure out what you could have done differently, what policy changes really make a difference in people's lives, what are the right questions to be asking. So it was a really wonderful master's degree experience. And one of my greatest mentors there was Jason Furman, who was Obama's chief economic advisor through the Affordable Care Act days. And he's somebody I could email anytime and say, what do you think about this childcare policy? What do you think about this unemployment insurance policy? How will it really help people? And so it's a great institution to be able to draw knowledge from still.
Certainly. And as you mentioned, I'll juxtapose in a sense two questions together. One, you said in your earlier opening remarks that people have had faith in you. Definitely, yes, you've been re-elected like 8 times or some such times, right, for the House, the State House, and now for the Senate. So question is that why and how come folks had faith in you? That's one. And second, now juxtaposing it to your master's, where you said that, yes, you understand some and you look at case studies and all. So if you were to do a case study on your own success as a public service officer, right, what would you say were the reasons that you were able to, garner the faith and support of your constituency thus far?
Well, I have to say, there's only a small group of people who know what it's like to serve from a very young age, who start in the legislature maybe before the age of 25. But we have to keep in mind that most people who make it to Congress, over half started in politics before the age of 35. So that's usually a very small bottleneck of, largely, I would say, white men, and often more conservative men and Christian men. And, frankly, they end up going to Washington and making a lot of laws about women's bodies. So, and women under the age of 35, who are the least represented in our political process. So, I think people took a chance on me when I was 22.
Mhm.
And that, I think, was based on, it was a House district where I could go knock on every door.
Mhm.
And I did. I knocked on every door and I asked people, how long have you lived here? What's your son's grade in school? What's your dog's name? And whatever those conversations were from the beginning, they led to larger conversations about property taxes or open space, or, something that was on their mind in the community. And I just did a lot of listening. And I challenged incumbents that year at this young age. And I won by the largest margin of any challenger in the state. I doubled my opponent's vote count. And so, people were really willing to take that chance on a very young person. It was the Obama election, remember, people wanted to have hope. They were coming out of the Bush years. They wanted to turn the page. They wanted, someone who was multiracial and had an incredible story. I mean, I often say my Indian immigrant father and my Jewish American mother ran an Irish pub, and it's a very American story. And so, for them, that was, it was an exciting time. And then what happened is, over the course of 4 elections in the House, running for statewide office at 29 and not making it, but having a very successful run for a young person, getting my master's degree and coming back to serve in the Senate, people watched me grow up. And I think growing up not only means you're able to better, better explore your policy options and accept policy failure and try again. But it also means that people got to watch me grow into my more authentic self. I was really going through being in the House in my entire 20s. And it was nice to come back to the Senate, having lost a race, to say, there is life after losing an election. And when you look back in history, almost everybody knows that. Barack Obama has lost an election. Bernie Sanders has lost several elections. We have a history of forgetting, once they're successful, that that failing in an election is a really important part of knowing who you are and how you perceive yourself and how you can portray your most authentic self to the community.
Very true. I mean, your story, one was to share, and as you're sharing, is truly an amazing story. Really, all these years that you've been. You mentioned something that it was the Obama election. When you were referring, it was the election of hope, or the years of hope. My question to you now is that, is now also a time when hope is perhaps the most important or one of the most critical aspects needed, let's say, across the country, across the world, or let's say, reflected in your campaign? So is hope also a strong pillar of your campaign?
That's a great question, because I don't think we have gone through something quite like the pandemic, where we're asking people to remain hopeful, remain patient, and remain committed to each other in society. I, certainly have lived through 9/11 and the Great Recession. For some of us, living through the previous president, Donald Trump, was a big exercise in having hope. The insurrection, really kind of put a wedge in the middle of our country. And, for those of us who are, come from places in the world like India, where there is sometimes ethnic fighting in our past, right? My father's from pre-partition Lahore. We are seeing that political parties are almost becoming ethnic groups. That people would be upset if their child married someone of the other political party. That sentiment is higher now than it ever has been in our country. And so I think we are asking people to do something more than be hopeful, which is to get beyond the narrow world that understandably became their viewpoint because of a pandemic, where you only talk to a few people and you only interact with a few people and you get your information from specific news sources. I think we're asking people to go back out in the world at some point and interact with people who don't think like them or look like them again. And, that is a great challenge. When I go to DC, I don't just create enemies out of everyone. I talk about being in Vermont, where, I still can work with the Republican minority leader, who happens to be the only other person of color in the Senate, a Black man. who's a former law enforcement officer, who's our, Republican minority leader. And he and I, were able to work together on a George Floyd remembrance resolution that all 30 senators signed on to. So, sometimes I'm just trying to remind people that Democrats and Republicans can stand in their truth and still work together. My Republican mentors, who have often been in the minority in Vermont, would say, when you're in the same boat, the majority steers the ship, but the minority points out the rocks. And, that has to be how it works, or our boat is going down together, So I think it's still important that we try to find places where we agree, and those still exist. We're just being told, when we have a very small world to interact with, that that's not the case.
Thank you so much. For the sake of our audiences who are tuning in and listening to this podcast and video, what is your website, please? Because one of the objectives of this, this discussion is also to get your message out and also kind of, spread the word for any fundraising, etc., to which I would come in a moment. So could you share with us your website if people would like to know more about you, or if they could go wherein and donate, let's say, to your funds?
Absolutely. I'm so appreciative of the South Asian and Indian community for stepping up and helping our campaign. We could use all the help we can get. We're in a very small state and, a state that people might overlook because we're not going to have likely a major Republican Democrat contest through November. The big race is now. The time is now to give urgently. And I hope it really excites people to know that you could have an Indian American in statewide office in Vermont, which would be historic in New England altogether. And so my website is keshaforvermont.com. That's Kesha for spelled out FOR, Vermont, VERMONT, all spelled out.com, Kesha for Vermont. And people can find out more about my story there. They can, reach out to the campaign. But that donation link is a really critical button on that page. And we would love to have the help of the Indian community. It's a really critical time. And I will say, one of the really nice things is it's helped unite our very small but mighty Indian community here in Vermont, whether it's through coming for business opportunity like hotel ownership, or our software and chip manufacturing, our higher education, our medical institutions, or as immigrants and refugees from the Bhutanese Nepali community. We have lots of, Indo-American, South Asians in Vermont, a growing number. And, I have tried my best to help bring that community together. And we have their support in so many ways. And it's great to add to that with support from around the country.
Great. So folks, those who are listening in, the website is keshaforvermont.com, KESHAFORVERMONT.com. You can go there and find out more about her and her work, and of course the all important blinking donation link, if you could kind of take notice of that. Before going into some of these aspects of campaign fundraising, you mentioned quite a few very interesting aspects. One, I found what you were talking about, people not barring into other political parties, etc. It's becoming a lot. What is our information diet? It's like the diet. We are in silos and we're just looking to get the information diet from that particular source or menu card only, right? And the other thing you mentioned very interestingly is that you mentioned something about enemies, or you don't, nobody looks forward to making enemies, but you mentioned that. And that reminds me, I don't know who said it somewhere, that in this world, there are only two kinds of people: friends and potential friends. So people, my enemies are my potential friends. Now, that said, okay, you seem to be having, if not a crowded, but there are quite a few other competitors out there in the field. And it seems all of them are women. 4 by the last count of 5, I see now. Is that
so? If you count the Republican candidate, yes. So in the field right now, announced for through the Democratic primary, there are 4 candidates. There is 1 Republican candidate. Yes.
But most fall into the Democrat. Democratic candidate who carries the August primaries would carry the November elections, right?
I don't see a candidate on the horizon on the Republican side who could change that dynamic. Yes, it's much more likely to be the Democratic candidate.
Fair enough. Now, in terms of your competition out there, right? I was just checking out some fundraising numbers and all. Maybe these are not very recent, but I think one of the contenders has about $250,000. I think that was the last quarter report, maybe. Another has around $190,000 and all. I would not ask you maybe how much you have or what you have, but how is your fundraising going? Is it on track, or are you needing to kind of prime it up a lot? Of course, it has to be primed up a lot always for any.
Right.
But how satisfied are you? And I mean, how do you see your momentum going in terms of the dollar numbers, which, let's say, some of these candidates have in their banks right now?
Yeah. Well, look, we have been so grateful that people have been digging deep for our campaign, and have been called to action by the urgency of our need. So I got into the race a month later than the other candidates. And when I got into the race, the questions were, of course, going to start coming. They've already raised, $200,000 or more dollars. How are you going to catch up? And we were able to raise $200,000 in 36 hours when we launched the campaign. So, we were able to catch up to our opponents in many ways, right out of the gate. And that came from a lot of people who said, I've been waiting for you to get in the race. There's a place for you here. You've served the longest and have the most experience, and you deserve to be in this race. And so people, dug deep. We then, started to build the campaign team and focus on work that I think the other campaigns may have done earlier than we have, because I just got married in August of the year before. And thank you, and just was trying to enjoy married life and figure out if I was going to run in this race. And I was hearing from all kinds of, climate leaders and people who'd worked with me over the years saying, I hope you run. But I hadn't, built a team and made a vision for the campaign months and months before I announced. So we had to rebuild our campaign, and then focus again on fundraising. And, now we have the endorsements of the AAPI Victory Fund, of Indian American Impact, of the AAA Fund, Asian American Action Fund, of Aspire or KPAC, the Asian American political arm of the AAPI members of Congress. And we're really grateful for all of that support, in addition to our labor and climate leader support. What we need now is for the Indo-American community to come together and recognize that there's an incredible opportunity here. Vermont is a great investment as well, because, you don't need to raise $20 to $50 million to run a credible race here. You need more like $2 million to run a credible race here. But we need to front load that as much as possible so we can be on television and building a great field program that, inspires voters around the state to get out in an August 9th election. That's a hard time to remind people that they need to vote. So, I would say that we've started to feel the love from the Indian American community, from the South Asian community more broadly. But we have a major deadline, March 31st. I hope this airs before then. And so this coming Thursday, March 31st, we have to pull another rabbit out of a hat, like we did when we raised $200,000 in 36 hours. And we hope people feel the urgency and dig as deep as they can once again, so that we can stay at least competitive with our opponents who've been in the race for longer. At some point, with the kinds of endorsements we're getting and the bills that I'm passing right now in the Senate, we are fortunate to be in a state where the person who raises the most doesn't always win the election. In fact, not often does the person who raised the most win the election. You have to be able to get your story out there and build a, really credible and dynamic team. And to do that, we still need more resources, absolutely. So we hope people will dig deep and recognize that their investment goes a long way in Vermont to a candidate who has the most experience in the race, legislating and policymaking, and in a state where it's a small state. We don't have to raise as much money, but we do have to travel the entire state. It's not,
Right.
a square mile in New York City. It's the entire state where we run in Vermont, and we'll need the resources to do that.
Awesome, thank you. And it really is an incredible story, I would say. And to the listeners of this, episode, I mean, it really is an incredible story. I mean, your personal story so far, and the opportunity which has opened up, or the opportunity which is there right now. So we absolutely, wish you, definitely the best. So, folks, once again, Kesha for Vermont.com would be the website. Please do go in there, check it out, and reach out, connect, maybe ask her if you have any questions, and see how she is running the campaign and, kind of taking the points forward. A quick question on a policy side, maybe, if I may. But you also mentioned very interesting thing. In fact, that was a question I had, that does it necessarily mean that the candidate who has collected the most, bundles of cash would win the election? You yourself said that it's not necessarily so, right? But it depends how the campaign goes.
It does. Yeah. When we look back in history, the times we've seen the candidate not necessarily win, even though they raised the most money, is often it's a general election race. So Bernie Sanders was outspent 2-1 by his opponent and still won the race. Congressman Peter Welch, same thing. Even I would say, we've had other statewide elections where the candidate who has raised the most has not won in the Democratic primary as well. But we don't have a lot of comparators to an all women, race for a congressional seat. People know this will be an expensive election, and we're all, we all have our communities that we're going to for fundraising, and certainly the AAPI community and the Indian American community are the ones, that I really need to come out strong and build that national network through. So, all of us have our strengths, and we haven't said one important thing about why this race is all women. Vermont is the last state in the country to have never sent a woman to Washington. So, we want to catch up to the rest of the country. And I think I'll just, I'll end on that note by saying, if Vermont, one of the whitest, most rural states in the country, elects a daughter of immigrants, woman of color to this seat, it will make Washington take notice and say, what is happening in rural America? It looks different than we had anticipated and realized. And so we have this incredible opportunity, if the community will support my campaign, to show that rural America looks like us as well, that I am a Vermonter too. And that will mean a lot to so many families moving out of, urban and suburban areas into rural communities to start that business, to have more open space and strike, out their fortune in rural parts of the country. We exist here too. And I want the rest of the country to know that.
Very true. I think that's a remarkable thing about the election. This point that you mentioned, that, a state like Vermont, rural, and then from there, such representation coming, it really means, it's a huge, it is in any case already, but a huge development, one could say, and out there. One little point on the policy side, you mentioned your areas of passion like climate change and labor, etc. On climate change, I have a quick question with you. Given the geopolitical situation in the world of today, the way the Ukraine-Russia war going on, and oil and gas shooting up, we seem to be going back to fossil fuels right now urgently, right? So how do you see that kind of playing out with respect to the renewables? If in a short sentence you could give your view.
Yeah. I will say this is a critical time to invest in green infrastructure and help accelerate the transition to a renewable energy economy. We know that helps people lower their utility bills. And we know that is a way for people to, access heat pumps and efficient homes, and really transform our energy economy. So while I recognize that we have to have bridge solutions, we should be looking at ways to quickly invest in new alternative fuels, electric vehicles, and ways of reducing our dependency on fossil fuels altogether. We now see the pain at the pump, even though, these oil and gas companies have the opportunity to drill domestically, to, refine domestically. They are using this moment, frankly, to increase prices and to gouge everyday Americans. And, that doesn't have to be the case. We should be changing our energy supply, and we should be doing it as quickly as possible. We're trying to do that here in Vermont by looking at, how we accelerate access to electric vehicles and access to changes in home heating. At least in our state, home heating and transportation are the two biggest sources of fossil fuel use. And we have to commit to people that we will help them have the choices they need in a new energy future.
So thank you, sir, Kesha Ram. I mean, maybe one closing comment, but before that, I would ask you a question that, okay, you said that, okay, I mean, you win some, you lose some, right? So let's say come August, we do not wish that. We absolutely really hope and wish that you cross the Rubicon and we see you in DC as a representative. But in case things don't work out, what is your look ahead?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple pieces of good news. I'm 35 years old. And, so if I win, I will join people like Senator Patrick Leahy in being elected when I was 35 years old. And it gives me a long opportunity to serve Vermonters and, figure out how to make the best of that role to meet the needs of Vermonters. But the good news is if I lose, I'm 35. And, I also can look ahead and have shown Vermonters that I would like to represent them in Washington. And there will be other seats that open up. There will be other opportunities to serve people. I think once you lose, you realize it's nothing to be afraid of, that you took a risk, you put a lot of issues out on the table, and you built a base of support that does not disappear. People continue to believe in you and want to see you go places. I remember the first time I lost a race, I called donors and I said, I'm so sorry. I thought I was really disappointing them. You invested so much, thousands of dollars in me, and I lost this race, and I'm sorry that happened, And so many of them would say something to the effect of, Kesha, I didn't contribute to you because, I thought you would win the race necessarily. I contributed to you because you were 29 years old and took a big risk running for statewide office. And that's the kind of person that I want to get behind in the future, because politics is unpredictable, and you have to get behind a candidate who, can pick themselves back up and run again. We invested in you for the long haul. And, that is so often what people forget when they look at folks who make it to Washington and then, end up there for a long, long time, is that many of them had a rocky road to get there, but they were the ones who picked themselves back up after they lost and ran again. And that often is what matters.
Awesome. And I do think that the prophecy of one senator from Illinois who mentioned about you, we do really hope and pray and wish that it comes true also, right? Now, any last comments? Okay, folks, now, once again, the website is keshaforvermont.com. Please go in there. And as she's mentioning, 31st March is one deadline where they would like to see some, some little cash coming in or contributions coming in. Or even if you miss the March 31st deadline, I think there's always time. And I mean,
yes.
Any time is a good time right now.
Exactly.
Right? In the coming weeks and months, please do really step forward, because this is a remarkable race, a remarkable candidate, one would honestly say, So any last message or a few words of a message for the audiences, and then we thank you for your time, please, Senator.
Yeah, I mean, I think so many of us in the Indian American community draw on our ancestors for strength. And, some people may look at my last name and wonder, or, it may not have thought of it at all, but my great-great-grandfather was Sir Ganga Ram, the famed architect and engineer who believed a century ago in, schools for girls, colleges for women, homes for widows, good irrigation, good access to healthcare for everyone, and a community that everyone could be a part of. I'm really, and so many Indian Americans stepped up to help India and my family's, namesake hospital, Sir Gangaram Hospital in Delhi, when the pandemic struck India and people needed oxygen desperately. And the pandemic, I hope, taught us that at some level, this really is about giving people access to food, healthcare, medicine, water, and then education and a sense of purpose. And that's the best we can do to impact the lives of someone else and give them the choice they need to be successful and to, self-realize. And so I think often of my ancestors like Sir Gangaram when I think about what's important about running and serving. And I hope the rest of the Indian American community will help me make history once again and ascend to our one congressional seat as Vermont's first Congresswoman.
So
Thank you.
absolutely, we do think so, and it's very, so nice to hear in a sense that you're rejuvenating the legacy of your great grandfather. He was definitely an iconic personality and known for his work across the subcontinent, actually, right? So we do wish you all the best, and we wish you, may the force be with you, Senator Kesha Ram. And thank you so much for your time. And
Thank
we'll
you.
stop the recording now. Just a moment.